You'll marry the Duke tomorrow. Lady Vivian Fairmont stared at her father, waiting for the cruel joke to end. Lord Reginald Fairmont did not smile. He stood behind the library desk with a marriage contract already signed beside his hand, his face calm, his voice final. Duke Benedict Kingsley will expect you at the chapel by 11. Vivian slowly rose from her chair. No. Her father looked up. That was not a request. The words struck harder than shouting. Vivian glanced at the sealed papers, then back at him. You arranged my life without asking me? I arranged your future. You arranged a transaction. Lord Reginald's jaw tightened, but he did not lose control. That frightened her more. This family is 4 days from ruin. The bank will seize Fairmont House. Your sisters will be scattered among relatives who neither want nor love them. And every servant who has remained loyal to this house will be dismissed without wages. Vivian's hands curled at her sides. So you chose me. You are the eldest. I am your daughter. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, not guilt, irritation. And that is why you will do what daughters of this house have always done when duty calls. Duty? Vivian repeated quietly. Is that what we're calling it now? He slid the contract toward her. Call it whatever helps you stand still tomorrow. She picked up the document, read Duke Benedict's name, and felt something inside her turn cold. She had heard of him, of course. Every woman in the county had. Wealthy, proud, powerful, a man who could have chosen any bride in England. Why would he agree to this? She asked. Because he needs influence in Parliament and our family still has old connections. So he gets influence, you get money, and I get a husband who doesn't want me. Lord Reginald's voice hardened. You get the privilege of saving this family. Vivian looked at him through gathering tears. No, father. I get sold politely. His hand came down on the desk, not loudly, but firmly enough to end the conversation. Enough. You will marry him tomorrow. I won't. You will. Then drag me to the altar. He stared at her for a long moment, then rang the bell. Vivian's breath caught. 2 maids entered almost immediately, their faces pale with discomfort. Lord Reginald did not look at them. Take Lady Vivian upstairs, prepare her wedding gown. She is not to leave her room until morning. Vivian stepped back. You cannot lock me away. I can do far worse than that if you force me to choose between your pride and this family's survival. The maids stood frozen, too frightened to move. Vivian looked from them to her father, finally understanding. He would not bend. Not for her tears, not for her fear, not even for the word daughter. As the maids gently led her from the library, Lord Reginald spoke once more. Vivian. She turned, hoping for one human word, one apology, one sign that part of him still saw the child who used to run to him after nightmares. Instead he said, Try not to disgrace us tomorrow. Before we continue, if you enjoy emotional Victorian romance stories about family, sacrifice, forced marriage and love that must be earned, we'd love to welcome you into the Candlelit Vows family. Subscribe and tell us in the comments if your father forced you to marry a stranger to save the family. Would you obey? Or would you run? Now, let us return to Fairmont House. Vivian's room felt smaller that night than it ever had before. The wedding gown weighted across a chair like a sentence. Ivory silk, pearl buttons, a veil folded neatly beside it. Beautiful things had never looked so cruel. She sat on the edge of the bed, unable to cry properly because every breath seemed trapped inside her chest. Near midnight, the wardrobe door creaked open. Vivian turned sharply. Her younger sister Rose slipped out from behind the hanging gowns with swollen eyes and a shawl wrapped over her nightdress. I waited until Mary fell asleep, Rose whispered. Vivian crossed the room at once and pulled her into her arms. "You shouldn't be here." "Are you being punished?" Rose asked. Vivian closed her eyes. "No." The lie tasted bitter. "Then why is Father sending you away?" Vivian stroked her sister's hair. "Because sometimes grown-ups make choices children shouldn't have to understand." Rose clung to her. "Will Duke Kingsley be kind?" Vivian looked over her sister's head at the wedding gown. "I don't know." "Will you come home?" That question finally broke something. Vivian held Rose tighter. "If I can." The door opened without warning. Lord Reginald stood in the doorway, candlelight sharpening the angles of his face. Rose jumped. Vivian rose slowly, placing herself between her sister and their father. His expression darkened. "Return to your room, Rose." "Please don't send her away," Rose whispered. "She didn't do anything wrong." Vivian's throat tightened. Lord Reginald looked at his youngest daughter only briefly. "She is doing what is necessary." Rose began to cry. He turned toward the maid standing in the corridor. "Take her." Vivian held Rose until the maid gently pulled the child away. "Vivian!" Rose cried. The sound followed her down the hall until the door closed. Lord Reginald stepped inside. "Do you see what your resistance causes?" Vivian stared at him. "My resistance?" "You are making this harder than it needs to be." She laughed once softly without humor. "I'm sorry my grief is inconvenient." His eyes narrowed. "Do not use that tone with me." "Then do not ask me to smile while you trade my life away." For a moment she thought he might soften. Instead he walked to the wedding gown and lifted the veil. "By tomorrow evening you will be Duchess Kingsley. You will have position, security, servants, influence. Many women would envy you." "Then let one of them marry him." His face went still. "If any other daughter could save this house, I would send her." Vivian absorbed the words slowly. "At least you're honest." He placed the veil back down. "Sleep. You will need steadiness tomorrow." But Vivian did not sleep. Morning came grey and quiet. The servants dressed her in silence. No one congratulated her. No one said she looked beautiful. Even the mirror seemed ashamed to reflect her. By the time the carriage reached St. Bartholomew's Chapel, guests were already inside. Her father offered his arm. Vivian did not take it. "I cannot do this," she whispered. Lord Reginald leaned closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Whether you can or not stopped mattering the moment I signed the contract." She looked at him, shattered. "I'm your daughter." "Today," he said, "you are this family's solution." She took a step back. He caught her wrist. Not roughly, but firmly enough to remind her she had nowhere to go. "Do not embarrass me." Her eyes filled. "Please." His voice dropped colder. "You have disappointed me in many ways, Vivian. Do not disappoint me on the only day you are finally useful." Then, with dreadful care, he straightened her veil. "Wipe your face. The Duke deserves a presentable bride." The chapel doors opened. Vivian walked inside on legs that hardly felt like her own. At the altar stood Duke Benedict Kingsley, tall and immaculately dressed, his expression unreadable. He noticed her tears. His gaze moved briefly to Lord Reginald, then back to her. There was no pity in his face, no tenderness, only measured observation, as though tears were merely an unfortunate detail in a necessary arrangement. The vows were spoken, rings exchanged, names joined. A marriage was made, though no heart had consented. That night, inside Kingsley Manor, Vivian stood in the chamber prepared for her, still wearing half her wedding gown. Benedict entered quietly, removing his gloves. "You will have the West Wing," he said. "The household accounts will be made available to you. If you require anything, inform Mrs. Whitmore." Vivian stared at him. "I require my old life." He paused. That is not possible. I know. Her voice trembled. Neither is pretending this is a marriage. Benedict looked at her for the first time, as though the conversation had finally become worth his attention. It isn't, she swallowed. What is it then? A contract between two families. The words were calm, precise, merciless. Vivian whispered, My father sold me. Benedict's expression did not change. Your father negotiated an agreement. She looked as though he had struck her. Is that truly how you see it? How I see it is irrelevant. The agreement has been signed. Something in her face closed. Then you and my father are not so different. For the first time, a flicker of pride sharpened Benedict's eyes. Be careful, Lady Vivian. She gave him a broken smile. Why? Will you lock me in a room too? Silence. He looked toward the door. You should rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Then he left. Vivian stood, alone in a room larger than her old life, wearing a wedding ring that felt heavier than chains, and understood with terrible clarity that she had escaped one prison only to be delivered into another. The following morning, Vivian woke before dawn. For several moments, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the unfamiliar canopy above her bed, the carved walls, the enormous chamber, the wedding ring resting against the morning light. Reality returned all at once. Kingsley Manor. She was Duchess Vivian Kingsley. Only she had never felt less like anyone's wife. She dressed quietly and made her way downstairs. The dining room was already prepared. A table large enough for 30 guests stood beneath crystal chandeliers. Only 2 places had been set. Benedict was already seated. He glanced up briefly as she entered. Good morning. His voice was polite. Nothing more. Vivian nodded. Good morning. She took her seat opposite him. Silence settled between them. The servants moved quietly around the room, pouring tea and placing warm bread on silver plates. Neither of them reached for it immediately. Benedict unfolded the morning correspondence. Vivian stared at the untouched tea before her. It felt strange. Yesterday she had belonged to one house, today she belonged to another, yet somehow she belonged nowhere. After only a few minutes, Benedict folded his napkin. I'll be away for several days. Vivian looked up. He continued as though discussing the weather. There are matters concerning the northern estates that require my attention. She simply nodded. He stood. If you need anything, Mrs. Whitmore manages the household. Then he walked away. No goodbye. No hesitation. No glance backward. The great doors closed behind him. Vivian remained seated. One of the servants quietly removed his untouched breakfast. She looked at the empty chair for a long time. So this, she whispered to herself, is marriage. By midday, the silence inside Kingsley Manor had become unbearable. Vivian wandered through unfamiliar corridors lined with portraits of generations she would never know. Every servant bowed respectfully. Every room seemed perfect. Every hallway echoed. She had never felt so alone. Near the entrance hall, she stopped beside the front doors. The sunlight outside looked almost inviting. Home. Perhaps she could return home, even if only for a day, even if only to see the place where she had grown up. She stepped outside. The carriage path stretched toward the main gates. Freedom stood only a few hundred yards away. She began walking. Halfway there, the gatekeeper removed his hat respectfully. Good afternoon, Your Grace. I'd like a carriage prepared. I'm sorry, Your Grace. There isn't one available. There are several, she frowned. Then prepare one. The old gatekeeper hesitated. I cannot. Why? His Grace instructed that no carriage is to leave the estate while he is away unless absolutely necessary. The word struck harder than she expected. She forced a faint smile. I understand. She turned before the old man could see the tears gathering in her eyes. By the time she reached the house again, she was no longer trying to return home. She had finally understood. There was nowhere left to return to. Fairmont House was no longer hers. Kingsley Manor did not yet feel like home. She belonged between two worlds, and neither wanted her. The days passed painfully slowly. Vivian soon discovered she could not spend every hour sitting alone inside rooms that felt far too large for one lonely woman. So she began walking through the estate. One morning she found two maids struggling with baskets overflowing with freshly washed linen. Without thinking, she lifted one herself. "Your Grace." One of the maids looked horrified. "Please, allow us." "If I can carry books," Vivian replied with a gentle smile, "I can certainly carry towels." The women exchanged uncertain glances before quietly accepting her help. Another afternoon she wandered into the kitchens. The cooks immediately stopped working. Mrs. Whitmore hurried forward. "Your Grace, may I help you?" "Actually," Vivian smiled politely, "I was hoping to help you." Mrs. Whitmore blinked in surprise. "Help us. I'm not very good at sitting still." A few nervous smiles appeared around the kitchen. "Then perhaps," Mrs. Whitmore said carefully, "you could taste today's soup." Vivian accepted the wooden spoon. The broth was warm, rich, comforting. She smiled. "It's wonderful." The elderly cook standing nearby beamed with quiet pride. Before leaving, Vivian looked around the busy kitchen. "Forgive me," she said softly, "but I don't know any of your names." Silence filled the room. For years, dukes and duchesses had walked through these kitchens. None had ever asked. The first maid finally smiled. "I'm Emily, Your Grace." Then another, Thomas. Another, Margaret. Within minutes, Vivian knew every name. She remembered every one. During the following days, small changes spread quietly through Kingsley Manor. She thanked servants instead of simply giving instructions. She noticed when someone looked tired. She complimented fresh flowers arranged in the drawing room. She thanked the gardener for the roses blooming beneath her window. She wrote a note praising the cook after an exceptional dinner. No grand speeches, no dramatic gestures, just kindness. The estate somehow felt warmer. No one spoke about it. It simply did. 4 days later, shortly before sunset, a carriage rolled into the courtyard. Vivian happened to be arranging fresh flowers in the entrance hall when the front doors opened. Benedict stepped inside. Rain had soaked his coat. Mud covered his boots. He removed one glove, then paused. His hand rested briefly against the table beside him. Almost imperceptibly, his face had grown pale. The butler immediately stepped forward. "Your Grace." "I'm perfectly well." Benedict attempted another step. The room shifted beneath him. He reached for the banister before his knees nearly gave way. Vivian instinctively moved forward at the same moment as the butler. Within minutes the physician arrived. After a thorough examination he looked toward the butler. "His Grace has a severe fever. He must not be left alone tonight." The butler nodded. "I'll make the necessary arrangements." Before anyone else spoke, Vivian quietly said, "I'll remain with His Grace." The physician simply inclined his head. "Very well, Your Grace." That night, the fever worsened. Vivian remained beside the bed, in complete silence. She changed the cool cloth resting across Benedict's forehead whenever it became warm. She encouraged him to drink water whenever he briefly woke. She adjusted the curtains when the moonlight became too bright. She never expected gratitude. She simply did what needed to be done. Sometime before dawn, Benedict opened his eyes for only a moment. He saw Vivian sitting beside the bed. A closed book rested in her lap. She had fallen asleep without realizing it. One hand still rested near the edge of the mattress as though she had reached forward during the night, simply to make certain he was still there. He watched her quietly for several seconds, then exhaustion pulled him back into sleep. When morning finally arrived, the fever had broken. Benedict woke to a peaceful room. Vivian remained asleep in the chair beside him. Her head leaned awkwardly against the cushion. The blanket at the foot of the bed caught his attention. He picked it up carefully and gently draped it over her shoulders. She never stirred. He stood silently for another moment before leaving the room. A little later, Vivian entered the breakfast room. Benedict was already seated. She hesitated before taking her place opposite him. For several moments neither spoke. Then Benedict looked up. His voice sounded exactly as calm and reserved as it always had, yet this time there was something quietly different. "Thank you." Vivian met his eyes. After everything that had happened, they were only two simple words. But somehow they were the first words that sounded less like a contract and more like the beginning of understanding. She gave the smallest nod. "You're welcome." Silence returned. Only this time it no longer felt quite so lonely. The morning after Benedict thanked her, nothing appeared different, and yet everything felt different. He still left early for his office. He still spent hours meeting with estate stewards and solicitors. He still spoke little. But now, whenever Vivian entered a room, he acknowledged her presence with a quiet nod instead of complete silence. She noticed it. She simply chose not to mention it. For the first time since arriving at Kingsley Manor, they had stopped hurting each other with words. They had simply become careful. A week passed peacefully. Then one rainy afternoon, a carriage bearing the Fairmont crest rolled into the courtyard. Vivian saw it through the library window. Her heart immediately sank. She knew that carriage. She had spent 24 years watching it arrive and leave. She never imagined one day she would dread seeing it. The butler entered quietly. "Your Grace, Lord, Fairmont has arrived." Vivian slowly closed the book resting in her lap. "Show him to the drawing room." By the time she entered, her father was already standing before the fireplace as though he still belonged there. He didn't bow. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't congratulate her on her marriage. He simply looked at her and said, "You're looking well." "Thank you." There was an awkward silence. Lord Fairmont glanced around the magnificent room with obvious approval. "Kingsley Manor is even more impressive than I remembered." Vivian said nothing. He turned toward her. "I trust you've settled in." She nodded politely. "I'm learning." He smiled faintly. "Good. You'll need to host the Chancellor's dinner next month." Vivian frowned. "The Chancellor's dinner?" "Yes." He spoke as though discussing one of his own household events. "I've already mentioned to several gentlemen that Kingsley Manor will gladly receive them." Vivian stared at him. "You arranged a dinner? Here?" He looked puzzled by her reaction. Naturally, she took a slow breath. "Father, this isn't Fairmont House anymore." He waved a dismissive hand. "That makes no difference. You represent our family now." She lowered her eyes. "I can't invite guests without speaking to Benedict first." Lord Fairmont's expression hardened slightly. "Then speak to him." "If he refuses?" "He won't." She looked up. "How can you be certain?" He answered without hesitation. "Because you'll persuade him." Vivian almost laughed. She remembered those words. They had followed her throughout childhood. "Convince your sister. Greet the guests. Apologize for your brother. Smooth over every mistake. Make everyone comfortable. Always carry burdens that belong to someone else." "Father," she said quietly, "I don't think that's appropriate." His face changed immediately. There it was. The expression she had known all her life. Disappointment. "Must everything become an argument with you?" Vivian looked at the floor. She had heard those words hundreds of times. Before she could answer, the drawing-room door opened. Benedict entered, carrying several estate documents. He stopped when he noticed Lord Fairmont. Lord Fairmont? The older man smiled warmly. Your Grace. Benedict nodded politely before turning toward Vivian. I hope I haven't interrupted. She shook her head. No. Lord Fairmont stepped forward immediately. Your Grace, I was just explaining that Kingsley Manor will be hosting several distinguished guests next month. Benedict looked at him calmly. Will it? Lord Fairmont smiled. Lady Vivian will explain the details. Silence. Benedict slowly turned toward his wife. She met his eyes. For the first time since their marriage, she looked uncertain, not frightened, just uncertain. Then Benedict asked the simplest question. Lady Vivian, is that what you wish? The room became completely still. Lord Fairmont frowned. Whether she wishes it or not is hardly the issue. Benedict's eyes remained on Vivian. I didn't ask you, my lord. Another silence. Vivian opened her mouth, then closed it. No one had ever asked what she wanted. Not once. Not her father. Not society. Not even herself. Benedict waited patiently. There was no pressure in his voice, no command. Just a question. She finally answered. No. Barely above a whisper. I don't want to host anyone. Lord Fairmont immediately interrupted. Vivian, don't be ridiculous. She instinctively lowered her head, exactly as she had done since childhood. Then Benedict quietly placed the documents onto the table. Lord Fairmont, the older man looked at him. Yes, Your Grace. Benedict's voice remained perfectly calm. Lady Vivian has already answered. Lord Fairmont forced a polite smile. Your Grace, she's simply overwhelmed. She doesn't always understand what is expected of her. Benedict looked at him for a long moment, then said something that changed everything. She understood my question. Silence. And I understood her answer. Lord Fairmont's smile disappeared. She's my daughter. Benedict nodded once. She is. A pause followed. Then he continued. But she is also my wife. Another pause. More importantly, she is a grown woman capable of speaking for herself. Vivian looked at him in complete disbelief. Lord Fairmont's voice became colder. I have guided her decisions all her life. Yes, Benedict replied quietly. I believe that's been the problem. The room fell silent. Your Grace, Lord Fairmont began. Benedict raised one hand politely. When Lady Vivian entered this house, she ceased being a responsibility to be managed. His eyes never left. Lord Fairmont's. She became a person whose voice deserves to be heard. Vivian felt tears gathering. She wasn't crying because Benedict had defeated her father. She was crying because, for the first time in her life, someone had refused to speak over her. Lord Fairmont looked from Benedict to Vivian. His expression slowly changed. He suddenly realized something. The frightened daughter who had once obeyed every order was gone. He straightened his coat. Very well. His voice carried wounded pride. I seem to have outstayed my welcome. No one stopped him. He walked toward the door, then paused without turning around. I did what I believed was necessary. Vivian quietly answered, I know. Another silence. But necessary things can still break people. Lord Fairmont stood motionless for several seconds, then walked away. The front door closed softly behind him. Vivian remained standing exactly where she was. She tried to speak. Instead, tears rolled silently down her face. Benedict didn't move toward her. He simply remained there, giving her the space no one else ever had. After several minutes, she whispered, No one has ever done that before. He looked at her. Done what? Asked what I wanted. The words hung between them. Benedict lowered his eyes. Then I'm sorry it took this long. That evening the rain continued falling against the library windows. A fire burned quietly inside the fireplace. Vivian stood looking into the flames when Benedict entered, carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one beside her, without speaking. For several minutes they simply listened to the rain. Finally, Benedict broke the silence. "On our wedding night, I told you this marriage was only a contract." Vivian nodded. "You did." "I believed it." He looked into the fire. "I believed duty was enough. I believed fulfilling obligations was all that mattered." He smiled faintly. "I was wrong." Vivian remained silent. "And I believed you were another version of my father," she admitted quietly. "I know." He looked at her. "In the beginning, I think I was." She couldn't argue. He took a slow breath. "We cannot choose how this marriage began." She looked toward him. "No," he continued, "but perhaps we can choose how it continues." Neither spoke for several moments. Then Benedict looked directly into her eyes. "I am not asking you to love me." Vivian felt her heart tighten. "I'm asking whether you'll allow us the chance to know one another, without contracts, without obligations, without anyone deciding for us." She searched his face. There was no pride there anymore, no cold distance, just honesty. "You're asking me to trust you," she whispered. He gently shook his head. "No." A small smile touched his lips. "I'm asking for the opportunity to earn it." Vivian felt tears return. She smiled through them. Yes, it was only one word, but this time it belonged entirely to her. Benedict held out his hand. "Come with me." She looked at it for a long moment before placing her hand in his. He led her quietly upstairs, not to fulfill a contract, not because anyone expected it, but because, for the first time since they had met, they were walking toward the same future. They entered his room together. He turned to face her. "Nothing happens tonight unless it's what we both want." Vivian stepped closer. She looked into the eyes of the man she had once believed would become another prison. Then, with complete certainty, she reached for his hand. "This," she whispered, "is the first choice I've ever made for myself." Benedict gently closed his fingers around hers. "Then let it be the first of many." Outside, the rain slowly faded. Inside Kingsley Manor, a marriage that had begun with signatures, sacrifice, and silence finally began with something far more precious. A choice. And sometimes that is where the greatest love stories truly begin. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Candlelit Vows for more emotional royal romance stories filled with heartbreak, hope, redemption, and unforgettable endings. And tell us in the comments. If you were Vivian, could you ever